Hi, I'm Matt Nasser.
I'm Claudia Baez.
I'm Bartholomew Bland. And this is our guest today, Saralinda Lichtblau.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Joining us for the podcast, How Does the Art World Work? And Saralinda, thank you for coming on today. We're very excited to hear about your career and your insights into how does the art world work.
Well, I will do my best.
Good.
It is a beautiful day, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have worked together for 10 years.
Well, about 10 years ago.
Yes. About 10 years ago, for about 10 years.
For about 10 years, yeah.
We were both at the Hudson River Museum, where I was the chief curator and deputy director, and Saralinda was running all of our...
Yes, clawing my way up through the ranks of the education department.
Yes. Where now you rule benevolently.
Yes,
is that right?
Absolutely.
That's very good.
That's wonderful.
Good. Yeah. But before you were doing that, tell us a little bit about how you got started in the arts and your segue to a career in the art world.
Well, this could be a long or a short version.
We have a good editor. I'm
going to leave it to you because it's been a trajectory. I cannot remember a time when I was not involved in the arts in some way, shape, or form. I would say it began through performance. I was always a performer and had my sights set on stage. At the same time, I was very fortunate in growing up in New York that I was exposed to museums, to really everything that the city could offer. And as a matter of fact, one of my earliest memories is of being in the garden at MoMA. Probably my parents took me for a Saturday afternoon class, and the sense memory of that experience really pervades my memory.
It shapes you. Those early exposures to art are very profound.
Exactly, and especially through the senses, which I will get to eventually. So I, did a lot of acting, in my youth, and when it was time to go to college, I kind of thought, well, I don't want to major in theater because I want to do everything. And in the meantime, I had traveled a lot and really begun to appreciate the sense of understanding that is available to people when they participate in the arts together, like through international festivals. Not just going to museums and talking to perfect strangers about ideas and concepts and reacting to the art together, but really working together internationally. Anyway, I thought I was going to be an anthropology major, but the methodology just killed me. So I chose art history because I had always loved art history and was rather adept at it. And that became my entry point to understanding basically everything, history, philosophy. I also studied literature, English and French. But at the same time, I acted throughout college. There was no drama department per se because I went to a Quaker college and was very active politically and did street theater as well as Shakespeare. And when I graduated, was like, ooh, which direction am I going to go in? And I had a introduction to a wonderful, wonderful gentleman named Sylvan Cole, who was the director of Associated American Artists, which was the largest gallery of original prints in the world. And so I had an introduction from one of my professors to Sylvan, and at the same time, I was acting Off-Broadway with various companies and doing experimental theater. So I went to work as Sylvan's assistant, and that was essentially my apprenticeship.
And did you view that as a day job, a day job,
day
that
job?
as an actor you were having this job that was interesting, but you wanted to, you were entirely, that was not where your heart was? You were
No,
wanting to
not
act?
really. It was really vying. I mean, I was taking classes, I was doing voice and I was doing, all kinds of classes that you do as an up and coming actor. But at the same time, I was very engaged and dedicated to my work during the day. And there was a real struggle there.
So these prints were actually like being sold he was an art dealer, this guy?
Yes, this was Associated American Artists, was an art gallery. It was on Fifth Avenue and 53rd Street. And the gallery was quite storied. Even during the Depression, it had published original prints, lithographs, woodcuts, etchings, engravings by artists that were famous. I mean, famous artists.
Well, no.
Grant Wood, Thomas Hart Benton,
All the
Edward
regionalist
Hopper,
artists. Yeah.
etc. And that were involved in not the NRA.
Were these the WPA
The
projects?
WPA, yes.
Right.
Yeah, with the
But
WPA.
you don't make much money selling prints.
Well,
Did they make it up on volume?
They published large editions, or relatively large editions, anywhere from 10 to 250, right? And they had a model. This is really going into the weeds.
But this is really interesting.
This is the art,
Very
yeah.
important.
So these are all original prints according to the definition, this sort of classic definition. And AAA, as it was known, published these works of art in order to make them available to the general public, and they sold them through the mail. So you could, sign up, be on their mailing list, and they would let you know, oh, we have this new Milton Avery, or this, ultimately, new George Nama or Harry McCormick. I'm just like pulling names out of the hat because some were up and coming. So they were supporting
The more famous ones.
younger artists through, the representation of, more familiar or famous artists. And at the same time, making original works of art available to people in the hinterlands.
But was it a subscription model?
I believe it was at that
Where you
time.
would get
Yeah.
a print a month or something? Or you'd sign up for a suite of work?
Right. This was kind of before my time.
Okay.
But I believe there was. There was the Print Center of Philadelphia did that. We were very close to our colleagues in Philadelphia, and as a matter of fact, opened an arm of AAA there for a while. So it was a national and international concern. And as a matter of fact, Sylvan, with whom I worked, had started out, I think, at Sears Roebuck, right?
Ah,
Okay.
yeah.
So this was a real melding of art and business, like literally art and business. I had no business background or experience. I came from a family of educators, writers, blah. So I had no experience whatsoever. But I really found that atmosphere very enlivening and interesting. Like, I learned all about the business of art while I was able to work with,
And what was the model? I mean, how were they making money when you were coming along? Were they selling these older prints, or were they producing new editions?
both.
Okay.
And we had exhibitions.
So did you have like an atelier where you have the print making?
Not our own, but we worked with ateliers. And
You were the distributor of the prints.
the publishers.
The
Publishers, you would say publishers and
Publishers.
distributors,
Yeah.
and we would commission them. So I kind of saw this as like a Renaissance model.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's right.
But that's
people
died
are
out.
trying to do this now, digitally,
Yeah.
and they're thinking they're doing this new sort of with this new model, and it's it's been around.
It's been around like longer than I've been around.
But I mean, this got cranked up in the 30s, right? Because there was the Depression. They wanted more affordable models of doing this kind of work. And these prints are still around. They're still very a lot of them are very highly collectible.
And a lot of them, there were these subscribers, let's say, who became very important collectors and who ultimately donated their collections to the National Gallery.
Right.
To the Met, to any number of of museums, to the Hudson River Museum, and it's just so funny because now, like skipping over a couple decades, I'm saying, I don't want to name any names, but I worked with that family to build their collection. Oh my goodness, was there anything they didn't collect? Because I see their name here and I'll see their name there. But these works were at the time, relatively accessible financially. So people could amass.
They were a notch above a poster. A little bit more than a poster.
Oh, far more than a poster. Yes.
Right.
Although posters we had, because we were at even a trip Associated American Artists before I left. I mean, we represented or we exhibited, let's say, Toulouse-Lautrec, Cheret, Mucha, all of those turn of the century posters because we were very involved in the revolution in lithography.
Right.
In the mid to late 19th century, that put original works of art on the streets, like les affiches.
It's super important to talk about the fact that what's a poster versus a lithograph versus what now is the digital print, which is infuriating to me. This digital print that they want to sell me for whatever amount, I'm like, I'm not buying that. That is garbage as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to destroy the world, but it's just like, no, a digital print is not a lithograph. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, no, totally. But I think even back then, the definition of original was shifting or changing. And I am sure it's ever since, the first silversmith or goldsmith, engraved something on a scabbard and inked it and put some paper on it, people have been arguing about whether or not this is the work of the artist. Yeah, is this the hand of the artist? What is the value we assign to this? And this is a rabbit hole we could go down for the rest of our lives, because back in, say in the 70s and 80s, there were lots and lots of arguments about that, or let's say discussions or debates.
But
and
whether they were signed, whether they were numbered. But going back to American Associated Artists, I remember we having big volumes. So they were selling the fine art prints, but they were also doing sort of bound or spirographed volumes where you could pull out the prints and they were sort of written on the back and then they would be sort of framed uppable.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's even before.
But and I think maybe that I didn't produce it, but they were working with a much more mass, it was their greatest hits.
I see.
That could be sold in a volume.
He's done his
and
homework.
you would pull them out and they sort of had the title on the back. You could sort of frame them up as so if you couldn't even afford the true lithograph, you could buy it in a much more almost an illustrated book that you would pull apart.
So how were those? Were those limited in edition? How were those reproduced?
I think that they were mass marketed, and they were
through photographic means.
The best known. Yes, through the best known, the people would be.
Listen, so the argument is, and I used to have the best arguments with my father, who was an English teacher and was very specific in his language, and would challenge me, what's the difference between the original and a reproduction? And I'm not talking about in scale, because we're not going to argue about that, because we know that the experience with an original work of art is irreplaceable. But one of the ways I was tutored sort of in a passive way when I was little was that on my wall in my bedroom that my father had created a frame where you could pull out and put in reproductions. And he had the folio from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I want to say I think it's both my parents, obviously. But they had this folio. And like every month or so, they would put in a Renoir or a Monet or like a Manet, like whatever. So by the time I was in high school and taking art history, about which nobody had a clue, I was like, oh, yeah, that's this and that's this. I'm like, whoa, maybe I should go into art history.
Maybe you could market that slide, the thing you drop in the image. I think there would be many parents who would like
It's a very good educational tool. I'm hoping you're implementing it and selling them in your museum now.
Well, it's the selling in museum is a whole other can of worms, which is fine. But fortunately, I don't run the retail end of the museum.
So tell us a little bit about the transition from being on the commercial side of a commercial gallery and how you ended up in the nonprofit world. And what do you perceive as the differences, the pros, the cons?
Not for profit versus for profit.
Yeah.
But and the interesting thing is that the lines have been blurring for forever, which is what made my transition not really a transition, but an evolution.
Because the museums have to make money too.
Yeah, right. There is always a bottom line. And one thing that I learned, this is skipping over again, during COVID, for example, when we were doing everything online and producing videos and educational tools, online digital tools, that marketing and education, there's really no difference because
you have to get the word out.
You got to get right. I mean, if a tree falls in the forest, right? Going back, one other thing I wanted to say was that when I was in the retail gallery space, there was nothing, and this really, really dates me. There was nothing called art law. We were making it up as we went along. We were really, I have to say, at the forefront, because just think about all the different areas that a retail gallery, publisher, business, publisher of also not only original works of art, but catalogs, et cetera, all these different areas that we were involved in. And there was something called the Art Dealers Association of America.
I think that still exists.
Around,
Exists. And
but what are you talking about, the law? What do you need
art
a law for?
Art,
copyright.
To not make any...
Droit moral. The French were way ahead of us, of course, in the sphere of the legalities of art.
Did you notice things that were not kosher?
Not necessarily, but how do you set the rules? It's transactional, right? There are contracts involved. Mm-hmm. When you employ or commission an artist to produce
can I ask
something.
you something? Sorry, that is
No.
But I think you might know the answer to this. The silkscreen process, the Andy Warhol phenomena. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in that because anybody can make a silkscreen, right?
Well,
silkscreens are easily done once you know the technique. You have the ink, you have the photograph,
you have the screen, you have the...
It's not...
It doesn't seem that easy. I would be hard-pressed to...
No, right. It's easy, Bart.
But he was not the first to do it.
But what I'm saying is, how many fakes are there in the market? How easy is to make an Andy Warhol? How few are there real Andy Warhols that have his hand on them? Because he did paint on some of them.
Yeah, but he also had a factory.
He painted on a lot of them.
He had a factory.
Yeah, they were made by a factory.
But
they're worth... How much are they worth?
Oh,
$50 million? But
that's the market, right? That is the market. No, because and I'm
sorry. I know. I'm just like
but all those AAA artists. I mean, how many of them were actually doing their own lithography? I mean, or were they?
You can't have
no. Were they farming it out, or were they working with a?
For example, for example, I mean, go back to the Renaissance. How many Renaissance artists painted every stroke on
Not
a
Rubens, not
huge
Van Dyck.
enunciation or like whatever. They, think about Raphael. Think about Raphael's, the cartoons for his tapestries. There is, and particularly in printmaking, it's a collaborative effort. If you go back even to the Japanese woodblock prints, to the ukiyo-e, Hiroshige or Hokusai did not necessarily, carve out all of their blocks. They might have conceived the original composition and, given it to their
assistant,
whatever, who did it, and they would say, oh, whatever, bon à tirer, or whatever the equivalent is in Japanese, and they would oversee the process. So I think this is a much wider,
But so what are you indignant about? That Andy Warhol didn't touch it, or that Andy Warhol is worth $50 million?
Or that there are a lot, or that it's easy to fake it.
I'm indignant about both of those things.
About both of those things. But I
mean, perfectly within your rights. But I think inherent in printmaking, including silk screens. I mean, look at Matisse. Look at the pochoirs he did.
But most artists who are not, where prints are not necessarily their forte, are working with a master printmaker,
right? And even, yes.
To translate their ideas. I mean, I'm thinking about the public art for the MTA and most of the public art that we see on the streets of New York and the subway system. Almost all of that is translated by the artist, their original concept, into stained glass or block glass or faceted glass or tiles and prison grade materials or whatever it is. The artist's hand is in almost none of that work because they're working on a medium they're not necessarily familiar with in a lot of cases.
The design is there. Yeah. With a lithograph, it's a stone that you need to work on. You need to draw on it, touch it. You need to throw ink on it. And then that stone goes under the press. It's a lithograph. It's a lithograph. I mean, you can't make a Picasso lithograph, just anybody, and he can't.
But are you saying that? But are you saying is that the argument is not the hand, it's the limited number? I mean, I think that's where when we're talking about digital print. Well, the digital print where you feel like you just keep hitting the button, and there's whereas a stone or a steel plate is the burr is going to wear off, the print, the image is going to degrade over time. Maybe you'll get 50, maybe you'll get 100, right?
Exactly.
So yes, that's true, but in the late 19th, early 20th century, photography started to become part of the printmaking process. Going from a straight lithograph, let's say, where the artist or an assistant from the artist's design drew directly on the stone or directly on the zinc plate, and then it was pulled, et cetera, et cetera. There, I think, at that time, we're looking at collagraphs, which combined. I may not be exactly right about this, but combined a few different printmaking methods. I was just at a show of Munch up in Boston, and it was fantastic because it was about the technical Munch. And Munch, I did a lot of work in particular with collections of Munch. And
I saw a fantastic show of his in Milan.
Right.
Oh my God. They did a great job there. So there were like rooms and rooms and rooms. He was so prolific.
He was prolific, and he was a great printmaker. And some might argue his prints there was a conversation between his prints and his paintings, but his prints informed the rest of his work more so than the other way around, because he was a DIYer, he welcomed happy accidents, and I don't want to get too technical, but he would work directly on the wood block. He would cut it up like a jigsaw, and he would put it back together again. But he also, and then he would ink it, and he would, from start to finish. Okay, no argument, no factory or Andy Warhol question ability here. But he also made lithographs, and he made etchings and aquatints. And for example, I think it's Death in the Sick Room, which is an incredible lithograph. where he achieved the blackest blacks in a really melancholy scene. I mean, it's just talk about forming content. It's gorgeous, but that was transferred to the stone by a specialist by a printmaker from a drawing by Munch.
So are we saying, for example, that there's a painting and the transference of the painting to a camera, you take a picture of the painting and then you sell that image as if it were a painting? Or you sell that image for a lot of money because you took a really good picture? You're so qualified at taking pictures?
Does it become a fine art photograph? Right?
I don't know. I think that photograph is nothing.
But what if the artist puts their hand onto the photograph? I mean, a lot of these prints, what if they're hand colored by the artist in different?
That's another thing. If you grab the photograph,
we actually have, here's a plug. Our current show has an Andy Warhol, some of his early wallpaper in it, where he was wrapping paper. Wrapping paper. Yeah. He was making in 1959.
I think wrapping paper is fantastic. I approve of wrapping paper.
I collect
paper. And I also approve of wallpaper. If you take a picture of one of my paintings and you put it in the wall as wallpaper, I think that's fantastic.
What about shopping bags?
Shopping bags,
I love shopping
bags.
Yeah.
But the fact that this photograph of a painting gets framed and hangs somewhere as if it were art.
We should frame our shopping bag.
I wanted to go back to something you said. You're talking about the intersection of marketing and education, and I thought about what this is. It's sort of like the AAA was educating, in a way, the public at large of what is good art, what is the zeitgeist of what we're, and gave people an understanding in a way, and created value of the original, Warhol created value by that, for that reason, to getting out to a mass amount of people. Now we do this with a digital print, with a digital thing where we're creating value, because the more people that know that thing, the banana on the wall, the more valuable it becomes.
But do you think artists are struggling to find something that has a limited number, like the way a traditional lithograph would? And they're kind of, because I think that digital photography is very hard that way, to convince someone to spend a great deal of money on it.
Of course. You can just make
it
a different size or a different...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know when we, and I'll have to check in with my curators about this, but, if we exhibit photography in the museum and people are really interested in photography, I think for a number of reasons, having grown up with it, feeling more comfortable with photography, because, hey, anybody can take a picture. So, and it's not like, oh, my 4-year-old could do this, Jackson Pollock, or like whatever. It's more like, well, there's something involved in photography, and it's an accepted as an art form, right? Which I believe, but it's also, I think, a very accessible entry point to the formal, understanding the formal qualities of other works of art.
Because it's in all of our lives all the time, even if you don't, even if you say you're not interested in art per se, we're sort of flooded with photographic images.
Yeah, and oh my God, I'm running out of storage on my phone because, you take 5,000, versions of the same.
And it's degrading the media. It's degrading the photography. The fact that we are all every day taking pictures with our phones by the millions. It's like, it's becoming like nothing.
Well,
really.
that's a whole. I think we should come back and talk about that, because photography then becomes a substitute for the experience.
Absolutely, 100%. The minute I take a picture, I move away.
Yeah. So that's like a whole other situation.
Whole other. What did you guys teach in the Hudson River Museum? You want to talk about that, the teaching aspect of it, or no?
Well, we could talk about that.
What I was thinking when I heard that you're educating kids, I was thinking, What is the most important thing? Like your experience in MoMA in the garden, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, how old are the kids that you're teaching?
Like anywhere from from toddlers to seniors.
Wow.
So at the
That's a
museum,
big program.
it's a lot because, as Bart knows, the education department is not only responsible for teaching children, but for providing experiences for all ages. So you have school programs, optimally in partnership with schools or school districts, where you develop a relationship with, from the top down, from the administration, from the bottom up.
Brings the kids a certain day, and they get classes that day.
So they,
and they get to see the museum.
Right. And the museum is multidisciplinary. So we have art, history, and science. It really started in a historic home called Glenview. 1877, actually, the site of Mrs. Astor's home in the Gilded Age, putting a plug in there. Okay.
HBO.
It's a great show.
Right? It's a great show.
Of course.
Okay. So just watch next time.
Yeah.
Mrs. Astor's home.
Okay.
And so we have the historic home. We have a planetarium in which we teach physical and environmental science. And we have an art collection, American 19th through 21st century, and changing exhibitions.
And you have an amphitheater. I wanted to mention the amphitheater because it brings you around to your interest in performance.
Right. And we have an outdoor amphitheater.
That works only in the summertime.
Yeah, summer, and sometimes we can sneak a little bit more in. But and this place, this multidisciplinary campus, is in Yonkers, New York, which is the third largest city in the state, with its attendant opportunities and challenges.
Near Sarah Lawrence College.
Near Sarah Lawrence College. Sarah Lawrence is a great partner of ours.
Place.
Yes, we work very closely with them on many levels. And it is a hub for the community. The education has always been at the center of what the museum does. And that is our mission, right? To facilitate experiences with art, history, and science.
How does it differ, your museum, from the Bronx Museum?
We have a collection.
The
Bronx Museum has a collection.
Right.
Yeah, no, they do.
And we are also...
Well, I think the relationship to Hudson River school painting, landscape painting, and to the museum has drawn a lot of its identity from the river.
From the river, yes.
And the banks of being on the banks of the river.
So the fact that everything that we do is interdisciplinary. We look at the programming from a holistic way. So how can we find those different entry points? Remember, I said art, history was my entry point to learning XYZ. So how do we, and I say facilitate experiences for people, through different means, through interaction, through conversation, through inquiry, through dialogue, right? Because we are not presuming to tell people how to experience works of art. We want to provide the sort of the ground.
The experience.
Right. For them and facilitate that experience. But just one second, because that school area is only one part of what education does. So we have these schools and we have relationships with schools, et cetera, to the point where teachers include visits to the museum in their curriculum. Okay. Then we have youth and family programs. And we have a junior docent program, which is for high school, a leadership program for high school students to learn, public speaking, to, learn skills for the workplace and for life. And every single one of them gets into college in a very challenging educational environment in Yonkers. We also have docents who are volunteers, mostly retired people. So we're providing opportunities to
teach the docents.
Teach the docents, and they in turn conduct tours, right? Then
That's free labor.
oh yeah, but they do it.
Volunteer. Well, that's
But
a big difference.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
They get
course.
a lot because
They
it's
get a lot of
lifelong
satisfaction.
learning.
I'm
They're
just kidding.
trained.
I was just kidding.
No, I know. Believe me, I know. But no, they're wonderful.
Yeah.
And they are like, between them and the junior docents, they, the public face of the museum,
Right.
right?
And how many people are in each of those programs?
There's about 80 junior docents and about 35 to 40 adult docents, right? And they are rigorously trained every week, with my team. I have a fantastic team.
What do you want to ask, Matt?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, no. I just, from when you started in this to now, I'm just trying to, is it a hopeful vision of the art world, or is it doomsday as far as like the experience of how the education of art is, is there more heavy lifting now?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'm a pretty optimistic person, and I am hopeful. We will separate this from the funding question, I think, because it is a not-for-profit, and we are particularly challenged at this point, along with other sectors of society. But the other ways in which we bring people to the museum to create meaning, to have their own experiences, is through more free-form kind of programming. So we do all public programming, which is, anything from artist workshops to panels to speakers, on different topics, and also performances. So what I have tried to do is activate the different spaces of the museum with different performance arts. I mean, so you have a tour of an exhibit, which is great. But you could also have a concert in the gallery. You could have a concert in the planetarium and blow people's minds.
Are you seeing a change in the kind of experiences people are looking for that are more driven by performance as opposed to a straight art historical talk, for instance, about an exhibition, that people want it to be interpreted dramatically, or that they want to have something where they are actually engaged in a more active kind of way?
Yes, and that's foundational to museum education. Museum education is a pedagogy that is based on inquiry and experiential learning, right? So basically, I went back for master's in museum education when I kind of figured out what it was I wanted to do to combine performance and academics, basically. And the strategies, the pedagogy of museum education is about interaction, right? And interaction is created through different sensibilities, through different senses, different modalities. People take in experience and learn in different ways. Like, we all know that. There's all kinds of, of brain theories and, that go into this in terms of, how do you read a work of art, right? And we employ these strategies. And performance, whether it's as an audience member or as a participant, is an entry into understanding works of art and making them relevant to your life, to your lives. So, to your point, Bart, we have an amphitheater series, which, I program in the summer. And we'll have jazz, and we'll have indie rock, and we'll have, God knows, we'll have
plays,
a falconry. That was the word I was looking for. Falconry, dance, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all, different artistic disciplines. As often as I can, I try to relate the themes of the performances to what is being exhibited at the museum. For example, Bart was talking about our connection to the Hudson River, which is a theme that flows through everything that we do. And last summer, I think we had an exhibit called Rivers Flow Artists Connect that was curated by two wonderful curators, right? Jennifer McGregor and Laura Vukels of the Hudson River Museum. And one of the performances was by our artist in residence, which was a dance company. And the dance company had worked with the public over the course of the exhibition, and then in the summer performed on the outdoor stage with an original score and water. Literally, the dancers were slogging, and I don't want to say slogging; they were incredible. Sliding. Remember slip and slide, like the.
Wow.
They were unbelievable.
Did they sign a release?
No,
Art law.
We're insured.
Okay.
We're insured. Don't worry about
Fully
it.
Insured.
But they really took the theme to heart and
when-
choreographed a full-scale performance using the element of water. So making that, literal and metaphorical connection to the visual arts that were on view.
And when you were running La MoMA Galleria, you must have had a lot of, what were some of the more successful experiences you had of putting performance into the gallery? Or was that more bifurcated in your experience there, the performance of that?
I mean, I try, La MoMA, desperate, like any arts organization, needs funding and needs resources. So the gallery turned into rehearsal space sometimes. So sometimes it wasn't so curated as far as that. But when it did come together was like when we did have an exhibition up that there might have been a play, or we could have a reading that kind of had some similar themes of it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times it was like, we need to do this dance thing here, and we need to, we need a place to do this event for this fundraising, and we need this thing. And you're like, oh my God, what is this? Sometimes it would fight, and it would be like an artist being like, I don't want that play about, someone killing this, in my art. And, so I would have liked it to be more cohesive, but there, the talking the theater arts and the visual arts,
right.
It's a very hard trick to bring off. I mean, we've done a lot of performances with Lehman stages and with students writing plays inspired by artworks that are in the gallery and then performing them there. And it's a really mixed bag. Some of them are wonderful. Some of them don't really fully come off. And, I think you're taking a risk. And it's tricky to find the right recipe, the combination to make it work, because I think it can kind of deflate if we're like, well, what was that about, or how does this really relate, or is it a superficial connection?
So I think we try. There are a couple things here, and I always welcome happy accident, right? Maybe the curators don't welcome it as much, but no, they do. They're very supportive, but sometimes magic works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think we approach it in a very mindful way. And we're very, we're cognizant of the limitations because you have to protect the art above all. But you want to allow the space for something intangible to happen, right? And to provide that opening for people to see art in a new and a different way. And it could be just as small a thing as having a talk or an interview in front of the artist's work so that people are like, oh, yeah, oh, I see what they're talking about. I mean, which is a real privilege to have an artist talk about their own work in the space, right? So that's like a very basic thing to a more immersive experience where you have, a company of ballet dancers moving through the galleries, performing to whatever, Bach or, folk music or whatever, in front of works of art that resonate with the movement and with the music, right? And every time we do something like this, we learn. We learn, well, maybe we could expand our vision, or in my case, more sort of, let's
scale it down. Let's make it a jewel box experience. Yeah, it's an intimate experience.
But it's so wonderful to work with visionary artists and say, yeah, I think we can do this. Always saying, but let's talk about this with the group.
So as we're winding up, as you're thinking about your storied career, you are working with a lot of young people who are looking to get into the art world. I mean, the situation of sort of jobs, the limited number of paying jobs that will support someone with a decent standard of living. What do you tell young people about going into the museum world or nonprofits generally? Do you say you better have a backup career, or how many people recently have you mentored that you sort of see going on to have a career similar to yours?
I never anticipated this career. When I started out, like museum, I never thought I would be interested in education, because that was kind of what was expected of me. And I was like, oh no, I'm the creative. I'm going to be on the stage, or I'm going to be this or that. And over the years, I discovered that I could combine my passions into what I do now.
That's a very satisfying
It
fusion,
is.
right?
I feel really privileged, because how many people can say that they really love what they do? And I do, as you know. But, it's also work. So there, with all the attendant
aggravations.
Yeah, but right. I love it, and
but anything satisfying is work, right? I mean, it's sort of creative work. It's creative in the studio, right. The aggravation studio when it's not going, and the business
very
of
privileged myself
selling.
Also. Yeah, but I think the most important thing of everything, I think, is your first connection to Sylvain. Mm-hmm. That was a very crucial moment.
Oh, it totally was.
That can happen to somebody or cannot happen to somebody. The teacher that introduces you is not always there. Mm-hmm. The teacher is not always there introducing every single student to somebody.
Yeah.
And because you have so many students, how many introductions can you make?
Over the years, obviously thousands. And I never realized the interpersonal satisfaction until a student who had become a junior docent in the program just came up to me one day. She said, "Miss Saralinda, I'm here because of you." Because when she was in second grade, I went into the classroom and talked about God knows what, and brought her to the museum with her class, and it made an impression. So what I would say to anybody interested in going into this field, it's really worthwhile on so many levels, and it is endlessly creative. Let me put it differently. It presents you with the opportunities to be endlessly creative, to develop really satisfying and significant relationships with the people with whom you work, including your colleagues and artists and partners and funders who make these experiences possible and allow us to experiment with new ways to bring people in and make them feel part of the community and make museum going part of their life as something really worthwhile and rewarding to them. It has its difficulties, and more so than working in the private sector. But
in what way?
Well,
I
think museum not-for-profits, it's no secret, are not going to pay what market rate for the most part, right?
Right.
So that brings up, so what do you do? It's okay, what's your day job, right? Or how are you supporting it? One of the greatly satisfying things I did was when I took a second job to help support the family by teaching at a graduate program at Seton Hall. you know.
Right.
And, you know, I love that. And that really brought to the fore my love of teaching, which is endlessly creative and performative, you know, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
So it scratches that itch, you know. But, and the amazing thing is that people I have taught have ended up working at the museum, which is like super cool, you know. You see it in real life. But the other satisfying thing about what we do, and I truly believe this, you know, goes back to my political education, let's say, in that I always wanted what I did to be socially redeeming,
Mm-hmm.
to further social justice, you know, in all its forms. And I really believe that the way that we bring art in all its forms to the public does promote social justice, and really helps people build meaningful experiences together that they carry out into the rest of their lives.
I think it's a wonderful closing sentiment, Saralinda.
Well,
thank you
Thank
for being with us. It's been a fascinating conversation. And this has been our most recent episode of How Does the Art World Work? Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you
you.
all so much. I could keep talking to you for
Thank you.
It's like
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.